The what?
Did she have some sort of
She's on a course.
training or something?
Yeah, she went on some training course, she said.
Oh, yeah, she said something about a tree.
There's always something. Always one more thing.
Completely dark. They don't look very good. You know,
Oh, yeah, I can read between the lines.
give me a little feedback here. The pixels are a little dark. Yeah, you too dark.
Anyone else want a chair?
I think it's, yeah.
Okay. I'm hosting from here, by the way.
You gonna mute yourself?
Yes, I do.
Echo. It's, no, 7 o'clock.
No, I have now lost. Alrighty.
It is. Are we good to go? All right, we will get started then. In the case of an emergency, I think everybody knows you can go out the door, you can go left, or you can go right. Additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items? Right. Hearing none. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. I'm sorry, Michael.
Duncan, I don't think it's a change. At some point, I'd like to add something to a future agenda.
Maybe we could add that to other business.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, open to the public for items not related to the agenda. We have Ryan here in the audience. I don't think we have anybody online. Ryan, do you have something? Okay,
Excuse me. Sorry, I'm just getting over a bug. Yes. So right now,
actually, if you can just state your name.
sorry, Ryan Doyle. Right now, the city website says that we can share our feedback at the public hearing on January 29th for the city plan or in advance with the planning department. Is that still a thing going on, collecting public feedback?
It is the third public hearing, so technically, yes. At this point, the intention is that most, if not all, public feedback has been heard. And my understanding is that the city council does not intend to make future changes, but it doesn't mean that a person from the public couldn't come and say something and spark an additional change. It just, we're coming up on the deadline for adoption of the city plans, but yes, that is accurate that it is the third public hearing. So it is an opportunity for the public to comment on the plan.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that we also, I know that you guys hopefully all saw the email under other business. I know, Michael, you wanted to add something. I think, Paul had asked that we add the, Williston was, I believe, voting on their, or having a public hearing on their changes. To come in, yeah, to come in compliance with,
Yes, 100.
yes, Act 47, okay. But we can add that to other business. On to announcements and staff report. Any commissioner announcements?
Beg your pardon?
Commissioner announcements? No. Donna?
Yeah, this is just a really quick one. I evidently got 2 tickets for an event tomorrow night called Climate Resilience Successes and Opportunities. It's in Montpelier. All the head people from all the agencies, government agencies and utilities are going to be there talking about what's working in terms of climate resilience and sharing that. And I thought it would be a good opportunity to meet some of those people and talk to them. And I have 1 extra ticket. If anybody else is interested in going, I don't know why I bought an extra one, but I do.
Any announcement from staff?
No, nothing really new happening. I guess I would repeat what Ryan Doyle actually brought up, that the city council is holding the third public hearing on the City Plan 2024 on January 29th. It has to be adopted for the city to retain its statutory authority to do certain things by very early February. So the intention by city council is that this was incorporating some changes that were discussed by the council at the previous meeting, at the previous public hearing, and then discussion afterwards. But again, this is another public hearing. Again, public comment can be heard but the intention at this point is that most, if not all, public comment should have been made. So that's on the 29th. And the only other thing is we are moving forward in our equity and planning outreach project, our grant funded project to formalize a structure for doing future public outreach in our planning efforts, both on the planning and zoning side and Department of Public Works, and hopefully being able to roll it out to other departments like recreation or library or city management as a whole. We've selected a consultant to work with us on that, and we'll be kicking off with them in the next week or so, and then we will really hit the ground running. So that's where the status of that.
Thank you, Kelsey. All right, on to number 5, transportation demand management, updated concepts, examples, and working draft of language. How would you, Nick, would you like to lead us in and give us the presentation? How would you like to? Yeah, okay.
Does indeed. Thank you very much, Kelsey. So I've got a few slides to show the commission, and we'll be putting those up right now. A few weeks ago, almost I think over a month ago now, we talked about the transportation demand management policy that we've been working on in planning and zoning. Give you a bit of an update, and I'm here to expand on that. I want to just put out a few things at the beginning of this presentation. I don't expect to have us moved towards warning a public hearing for this at this point. This is really just intended to be an update for your benefit and to solicit some feedback that we could use at this stage to take us from now to the point where we could consider warning a public hearing. And would like to, it's my personal goal to aim towards having that be the outcome of our next discussion about this policy at a planning commission meeting, but we will see how far we get tonight.
And I'll just add one thing to that. Our intention going into the future is not to have overlapping sets of LDR amendments. We ran into a situation a few times in the last year or two where a public hearing would be warned on one set of LDR amendments, but then the next meeting we have a discussion on a different set of amendments that then is warned for a different public hearing because of warning requirements. So then you end up showing up for the public hearing and going, which one are we talking about today? And it just gets really messy, and it gets messy for our development review staff as well, because they have different effective dates based on when things were warned and adopted, and it just gets really messy really quickly. So we are intending into the future to do our best to cluster our LDR amendments, even if they're related or somewhat related or even unrelated, trying to pull them together so that we're doing a public hearing on several things at once. And maybe that'll delay some of our amendments by a meeting or two, not pushing it by 6 months or something, but not having it so that we have hearing amendments. So the TDM updates that we're talking about today, the intention is that they will be clustered together with the S100 updates. So that's why we put this meeting in sort of the middle of our S100 discussion. And also we're working on some other data collection and mapping for the S100 for a better discussion at our next meeting. But that's just a bit of clarification about why we're throwing this into the middle of that discussion, and also about the timing of when the TDM stuff may move forward to public hearing. It'll be hopefully at the same time as those other updates.
Yeah, that was my question. We would need actual LDR language before.
Yes, and we will be looking at a draft of some LDR language tonight. Yeah, sorry, Donna, would you have a question?
Just a quick preliminary question.
Yeah.
I was just curious, what is the status of current transportation impact fees? Are there such things, right?
There are.
There
Yeah,
are. I
there
thought
are.
were.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just Because I'm thinking this is not necessarily in addition to those, or is it?
It is, it works with them, it dovetails with them. I
Okay.
think that would be maybe the best verb to use. And we'll talk about that
All right.
and sort of get into
If
the
it wasn't
details of it.
clear.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? The purpose of meetings like this is to ask those kind of questions, get answers and clarify that sort of stuff. So first bit of feedback is talk more upfront about traffic impact fees. So few definitions to get through. We've at the top, we've got VMT, vehicle miles traveled. That can be individually or in the aggregate. Level of service is just the amount of congestion that a street or area is experiencing at a particular point in time, and it's a metric used by traffic engineers to talk about performance. And the scale is letter grades, A through F. We have, of course, transportation demand management, or TDM. This is much like transit-oriented development. It's a bit of a neologism that brings in several different policies, kind of bundles them together to function as one system. And that is, though that system can vary somewhat depending on the scale that we're looking at, whether it's a individual city or town or a larger metro area or a county or something like that. We, of course, are only talking about South Burlington tonight when we're talking about a TDM policy. And then, of course, PM peak hour trips. This is a little bit of minutia, but it is another metric that traffic engineers use to measure volume and generation of traffic. And it is the metric that we are basing the modeling that we have used in this. We are basing our modeling on PM peak hour trips generated. So we're going to talk about trip generation in the next couple minutes. And when we do, please just keep in your mind that we're talking about PM peak hour trips. These are trips measured at basically rush hour. So when we're talking about trips generated, we're talking about trips generated and the evening rush hour. Okay, so a few goals. This is a bit of review from last section, but we are just a little review of why exactly we are talking about changing our traffic policies. Right now, we have some situations where the current traffic budget of vehicle trips generated in the traffic overlay district is artificially, we feel artificially constraining people's ability to expand, modify, or start new businesses and the sites associated with them without at least disproportionate traffic impact fees or other associated costs that would be bundled into their permitting. And we are also trying to promote active transportation as per a number of different city initiatives, goals, and policies. And TDM has emerged as the policy vehicle by which we are trying to reconcile both of these goals.
Just on a point of order, can we ask you questions as you go, or do you want to run through it?
Please do. Yeah, please. Yeah, absolutely. I think last time we were doing a bit more of an introduction. This time I'd like to talk about minutia. I'd like to talk about details, and I would definitely like folks to feel free to speak up and ask questions as they come along. So I appreciate you asking that. Thank you, Michael. Yes, Fran.
So are there specific areas of the city where this would apply?
This would be a citywide initiative. This would.
Citywide?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
I have the same question under the third bullet point. Which are the areas identified as ready for development? Are they the city center or the
Yeah, exactly. So city center and
neighborhood development area?
Neighborhood development area, yes. Specifically, though, as you'll see from the way that the policy is structured, what bullet number 3 really references is corridors such as Williston Road, Shelburne Road, Dorset Street, where existing fixed route transit is around and available. We're hoping to build off of that. And these are also tend to be areas where zoning or anticipated zoning changes allow for higher density than in other parts of the city. So what we're trying to do is start to align the traffic study part of development review with the rest of the development review process, which has been, incrementally gearing more towards higher density in certain areas. So some of the components of this are to retain traffic impact fees. We are going to be retaining them, although there will be different options for how they are assessed and what the rest of the policy, how the rest of the policy affects them. To create a differing level of service requirement depending on the different areas of the city, just acknowledging the reality that certain places are going to have faster and greater volumes of traffic, whereas other places, let's think about the street that we're on right now, we desire lower volumes and lower speeds of traffic, and we should have policies that reflect that. Then, of course, to right size the amount of development review time and attention that the city is putting into these policies right now, we are in a situation where smaller projects, depending on their location, can often incur very intensive reviews and study. We feel as though that should be corrected, and it should be the largest projects that are under the largest amount of scrutiny. And so this policy attempts to reconcile that. And finally, of course, boost the number of options citywide for getting around without a car.
Question.
Yes.
It seems like it's leaning very much toward corridor development and commercial development as well as multifamily residential. But we have places pending development in the southeast quadrant that have no access to transportation
Mhm.
Right now. And so it just seems to me that at least in the winter time, there's options in the summertime, but in the winter time, you're just generating, you say you have a 200 house development.
Yeah.
Even if they're single family.
Yeah.
You're generating probably 300, 400 trips a day
Mhm,
from
mhm.
that neighborhood.
Mhm.
And we're not addressing those.
Mhm.
And that seems like that's an oversight.
It is somewhat, it's part of the policy that we would like to develop further. And there are a few things that do directly address that, such as bonuses given towards citing development, whether it's single family homes or multifamily commercial along transit corridors. And we've talked about other TDM options that would apply specifically to single family developments as well, such as bike corrals in neighborhoods and or extending the logic of a transit bonus to include like bike ped infrastructure as well.
Kind of curious about this because, why not for those neighborhoods that don't have current access to transit, to include in their regulatory fees, payment of a transit subsidy.
For the
to get at least some small bus or something, because it's been discussed in a lot of the conversations around the city plan, that you need an in-city,
a circulator.
circulated bus, to get, to connect to parts of the town, so you don't have to go into Burlington. 'Cause people really don't want to go into Burlington to get to the other part of South Burlington.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, perhaps some subsidies can go toward actually creating that kind of.
Yeah.
bus.
Perhaps. I'll
At least for, certain hours of the day when there's traffic generated.
Yeah, perhaps. I'll say a couple things. One, you've identified a definite need for a type of transit service that does not exist at the moment. Two, this policy isn't really intended to create that like a whole other service. Rather, it's intended to align development to take advantage of existing services and begin a broader shift from the current palette of options that people have for getting around towards a more balanced palette. And thirdly, while we recognize that this policy, especially in its draft form right now, isn't going to capture every single development scenario, and that single family home neighborhoods are one of the big categories that are underserved by transit and not addressed as directly by this policy as, say, a multifamily or mixed use development would be. That being said, they would still be subject to site plan review and would be required to pay traffic impact fees if it's large enough to do a traffic study to examine road work that might need to be done on approach. And then they would also be required to, like I said, pay the traffic impact fees. all of which go towards projects such as, go into infrastructure projects designed to make transportation more feasible here in South Burlington. So it might just be the case that they pay into a development like that rather than having TDM options to exercise, would pay greater traffic impact fees than a multifamily version of that. And then,
I get that. It's just that I still will see 200 cars a day going back and forth in front of my house.
Mhm,
You
mhm,
know,
yeah.
that's not gonna stop that at all. And even for people who have limited access to transit in my
Mhm.
neighborhood, it's not gonna change anything
mhm, mhm. Not for new single family homes at the moment, but
or even existing.
yeah, it's important to recognize this policy does not apply retroactively. So existing.
Say that again?
This does not apply retroactively. So existing construction and existing projects will not be affected by this unless they are up for significant redevelopment.
No,
Which is
yeah,
the
well,
same as the case with the impact fees. Like you're not charged if the impact fee structure changed, or say that just the amount changed in the current structure we have, existing developments aren't charged that delta. They're just charged anything new if they end up with more impact with a future site plan. So it's the same thing. It's only when you come in for a site plan review that any of this applies.
So existing developments don't pay any impact fee.
They would
they-
have paid whatever they paid when their last improvement or other site plan happened. So it would be whenever someone comes in for a new building, a change of use, any structural differences, like there's certain things that trigger site plan, but not just, if the U-Mall is sitting there and they don't do anything, they don't get charged anything until they propose to do something.
Well, those developments that we did in the past, sprawl,
They did.
generate a huge number of trips. And can we not find a way to incentivize those? I mean, you'd have to deal with the residents, I'm assuming.
Yeah, legally, there's no way for the city to sort of come back and say, hi, now you owe this thing, because it was something that has to
Not
happen
happening.
in their review process. There could be other opportunities for incentivizing things like that,
Some sort of
incentivizing
credit.
something like the city will pay half if you do the other half. Like there's some things like that if people recognize it will improve their quality of life, that they may, it's all if, but that's the sort of thing that we could do, but that would be something separate from this system.
I think Donna had a really good point. I think, Michael, you're speaking to it too. And I thought about this, and I don't know if this is the framework with which we could look at this, but we have three major north-south corridors in this city: 116, Dorset Street, Spear Street, that are not served by any public transit.
Mhm.
We have a lot of people who live on those corridors, and we've talked about what could we do to get some sort of public transit there. I don't know if somewhere baked into this.
A little bit. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we talked about putting a transit hub here in city center. But I live right off Dorset Street. I'm sorry, Spear Street. I would love to be able to get on a bus and just come to Dorset Street.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get on a bus that I have to go down to Sheldon Road
Yeah.
to go into Burlington to come here. Not happening.
Yeah.
So I mean, we've talked about this a number of times. I think it's a critical need if there's some way that we can look at it. I don't necessarily agree with Michael that we got to soak the folks who already live there, as I already live there. But, somehow trying to incentivize or get some sort of small bus.
Yeah.
I had thought about, that talking to the condominium associations and homeowners associations about what they can do to incentivize their members, like I'm
Yeah.
a member of my homeowners association, to ride share,
Yeah.
carpool.
Yeah.
But, I think we would need to help them with ideas and talk to them, for sure. I made a note that where you said, who else should we talk to? Condo associations and homeowners associations, for sure, because they represent a lot of people and a lot of trips. Whether mine is small, but places like South Village or Sidable 1, 2, and 3, or Dorset Farms, or all these, and then what's going, 122 houses going up in the lakeshore. It's they're all miles from public transit.
Yeah.
Not served.
I think a major thing is that, and we'll talk about this when Nick gets into the details a little bit more. If you can't use enough of the options to basically pay down some of your, like sort of substitute for some of your impact fees, you will be still paying a significant impact fee to the city. And so something like a city center transit hub, paying GMT to run additional lines or setting up our own internal sort of van system or whatever it is, all these kinds of transportation options, those are things that could be paid for out of that fund generated by impact fees. So it's kind of, this framework is much more important and effective for the areas that are already in, not just our transit oriented and transit served areas, but also areas that are served by bike path and other things. You'll be able to get a lot more credits through the system, and then your impact fee to the city will be reduced. And part of it is that is generally proportionate to the additional cost that the city will have to bear to improve the transit system in your area.
Yeah.
The city won't need to pay for significant increases, or it won't cost as much to improve transit on Williston Road as it will to have a brand new bus run down Spear Street.
I just wanted to add on to what Donna was saying. And you said this isn't geared towards the single family residence developments. But given that those developments are creating demand that we don't currently have a way to support, it strikes me that it would make sense to have an additional impact fee saying to those people, if you are going to build in this location and this infrastructure does not exist,
Mhm.
you need to pay into a pool that will provide it later, because otherwise we continue to do what we've done in the past, which is create demand without any way to cover it.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
I don't know how you can incorporate that into this, but I think doing something so that those residential developments are either incentivized or decentivized, whichever it is.
Yeah.
So that, I'm gonna build in the core because I can afford to easier than if I actually have to pay for the demand that I'm creating when I build over here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Just wanted to add that.
So yeah, we that's actually entirely possible. It's not something we talked about, but that would be something that could be possible. And you know, we can talk about it a little bit more during the case studies, but by not having reserving options for TDM reductions for single family home developments, we have essentially kind of done that because they have fewer options for reducing their impact fees than other types of developments would. Therefore, then that acts essentially as a potentially higher fee for single family home developments, given that they don't have this option to reduce those fees through building infrastructure. With the and that's an explicit acknowledgement that those single family home developments benefit less, in terms of traffic generation from something like covered bike parking or, a transit stop next door than would a denser development, basically.
You didn't really mention in the list, though, construction of off-road bike ped facilities. That wasn't one of the point getters.
No,
Sort of
no,
surprised
it
at
wasn't.
that.
It wasn't. Yeah.
Because that would apply in places without transit,
Mhm.
and it's even more important.
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
it's equally important in places with and without
Yeah.
transit.
That could be one of the options. We're presenting a somewhat simplified list, and one of the purposes of tonight would be to talk about other options that you folks would like to see on there or just explored. And we have a great consultant who came up with some of the initial ideas for the list. So these are based in a certain kind of scientific rigor because people have studied what happens when you
So are
put in
you-
a bus stop at a development. Yes.
Are you keeping track of the could be's that have come up tonight so that they don't just sort of,
Annotated version, yes.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Nancy.
okay.
And we have the recording.
just so they
and
don't,
we use
I
it.
mean, so they can actually
Yep.
move forward?
Yep. The only other thing I was going to say to Donna is I think it would be part of what part of the failure of developments in the 90s and 2000s is things like sidewalks may have been required, but the sidewalks is a chunk this long that doesn't go into anything. So I think it requires being very thoughtful and very careful about allowing credit for off-road bike facilities if it's just from this side of the property to this side of the property. Because they don't have any legal ability to say like, oh, and I'm gonna go across my neighbor's property. It'd have to be connected, and I think it would be something, this is just spitballing, but something in the same realm as the official map, that if you have an official, like if the city plans for a bike connection through a certain neighborhood or through a certain place, and you have the ability to do that when you upgrade your site, when you change your site plan, maybe you get TDM points for constructing that. You may be required if it's actually located on the city map, on the official map, to do that. Because if you, for a street or something, if it's on your property, you're required to do it. But it's something that you'd want to be thoughtful about. So just throwing that out there instead of having disjointed sections of sidewalk like we do in some places, and other communities have much worse, actually.
And I would like to move to some of the case studies and some of the details, but I just want to end this part of the discussion by noting the table of TDM options, the things that folks can get credit for, is intended explicitly to be a mutable document that can change fairly rapidly depending on needs, new opportunities, new technologies, such as that. Okay, so review process basis. So the idea would be, much like someone approaching for a zoning permit, they would come in with some information about what they want to build. Just move this out of the way so that you folks can read that. And that didn't help at all. And the project would then be sorted based on its land use, size, and intensity into one of 3 different categories. Each category has a different level of mitigation or traffic impact reduction that they must achieve through either adding physical site improvements, adding programmatic improvements and amenities at the site, or by doing a buyout option and paying enhanced impact fees. It's the basic idea. Yes.
The 5 and 14% seemed kind of minimal. Because, when you consider that a large development that could generate a couple hundred visits an hour, and at rush hour, if you're only reducing it by 14%, you still have what, 160 some.
Yeah.
You still have 160 some additional car trips. And I think most people in South Burlington kind of figure that what we've got right now is that's it. You can't really handle any more traffic than what we have right now. How does this going to address that if it's still allowing a lot more traffic?
Couple ways. Well, the numbers themselves, just to speak to those, were generated by our consultant, and he's a traffic engineer, and this is based on studies of other TDM options or TDM policies around the country. And so these numbers reflect what seems to be possible using the options that we allow developers to choose.
Well, given that we're not building any more roads, because that may not be an assumption in some parts of the country, but here I think we can assume we're not building more roads. No, we're not widening roads.
Right.
We might increase intersection, traffic, but I don't think we're building any more roads or lanes.
Yeah. The other side of this is that what we're assessing when we look at TDM requirements, when we sort a project into one of these categories, is we're looking at the difference between what has previously been allowed for that site and what would be projected for the new proposed use. So let's say the University Mall goes in for redevelopment. Someone's going to tear the whole thing down and build a big new neighborhood. Everyone's very excited. That would be the amount of trips that they would need to mitigate using this process would be based on the difference between what they are currently allowed and what they propose and what their proposal would result in according to our models. So given that much of the city is already built out, most of the projects that we anticipate that would be subject to TDM review would be only required to, or would basically be, they would already have some amount of trips budgeted. That is to say, our infrastructure already supports a certain amount of trips that are generated by that use. So The most impactful things, as well as for stormwater, schools, anything, infrastructure wise, would of course be greenfield development. But all of our, the last couple decades have been an attempt to shift away from greenfield development more into infill and redevelopment. And this is just a way of bringing our traffic impact study part of the development review process up into line with that.
You used the word number of trips allowed.
Yeah.
Currently, how do you establish that? How do we
It would
establish?
come from the previous permit. So like most properties that have either have zero because there's nothing there, or if they have a previous site plan review approval, it'll say it's been approved for 65 peak hour trips or whatever it is.
The other question, not particularly, but do you have a city or a town that has successfully implemented a TDM?
That notably San Francisco has, and pretty big bug city. And
I think we should be comparing with cities that have very limited public transit.
mhm,
San
mhm.
Francisco would not be a
Mhm,
good
mhm.
example of that.
Personally, I haven't spent an awful lot of time studying that. I've been mostly working with our consultant to provide us the data that we needed to right side it.
They
Yeah,
should provide us with some information about what places with very little limited transit and largely suburban,
Mhm.
lots of traffic coming
Mhm,
in from
mhm.
surrounding towns,
Yeah,
how this has worked before.
I'd be happy to ask for some more information about what he's used as case studies. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at our review process flowchart. So this kind of takes us through it's very simple, as you can see. This takes us through how an applicant might view the process. So we would start with a draft proposal that would come in same way as zoning permit application would. That would provide us with the details that we were hoping that the applicant would be able to calculate their vehicle trip estimate, the generation.
Project size would be the number of dwelling units
Project size is
if
based
it's
on,
residential.
yeah, it would be dwelling units and floor space for residential. It would be assigned into its correct category, at which point the traffic impact fee is estimated, and the resulting category also places also gives them their target for how much they need to reduce their projected trips by, or mitigate is the word that we're using. If it is a small project, so under 25 PM peak hour trips, and again, this is change. This is the change from the existing use to the proposed new use. So if that change puts them into the small category, then all they would need to do is to meet the LDR minimums for whatever their project is, sidewalks, street lighting, that's bike racks, that sort of thing. And they would pay their traffic impact fee, and they would be granted a zoning permit as long as they meet all the other requirements for that. If it's a standard or large, that's when we start to get into mitigation. So the way that works is that once a category has been determined, or a project has been determined to be standard or large, the applicant would then have the option to either they would have the option to choose different options for reducing to mitigate, or they could just buy out, basically, buy it per trip. We have deliberately calculated it so that most of the TDM options are going to be cheaper than buying out. So then the idea explicitly is to channel development money into infrastructure that benefits people who get around without a car or may choose to do so.
How does this work with large developments that are not owner developed? In other words, I could see it working for a large corporate headquarters or something like that. But a lot of the development around here is, it's rental, it's lease property, most of the commercial, doesn't have even a customer for going to be probably years.
How
are they gonna
we would be, you know, we would be assessing this, working with whoever owns the building or something like that. So like, you know, if someone were to propose and build a new version of the Blue Mall or
They just
something like
don't
that,
have control over a lot of these things.
such as the,
So in any site plan application, the owner of the property has to sign the application. So the owner of the property has to agree to all of these things. And if it's up to, and if the owner of the property decides not to allow the tenant to install bike racks or whatever it may be, then that's between the tenant and the owner.
No, but under the large, looking at car sharing membership.
Yeah.
Parking cash out option for employees, flex time, compressed
then-
work week, telecommuting. It's like the building, a tenant occupied, commercial building. They have no control over any of those things.
When if a building was constructed and a new tenant came in, they would have to be coming in for a change of use. Generally, there's a few situations where you may not necessarily need that. But if the applicant in that change of use, which would generally be both the tenant and the property owner, selected any of those options, it would have to be something that they had both agreed to, that they would.
So they'd be obligated. So the builder is obligating his tenants to these.
Generally, a change of use, the applicant would be the tenant and the owner of the property is the owner of the property. So the tenant would be the applicant for a change of use site plan review.
Mhm.
So they're the ones making the decision and obligating themselves to do the thing.
So they'd have to certify that they are telecommuting.
Yeah, and there's down the presentation, there's what kinds of options there may be for reporting, annual reporting, enforcement, things like that.
it's also important to note that we have reserved what we're calling the programmatic stuff. So stuff that is not physical in nature. That is everything green there
Mhm.
for just the largest developments. We anticipate to get the fewest number of those out of all of the TDM reviews that we're going to do. And also those large developments, the way we've written it, tend to be what you refer to a corporate headquarters or a hospital or a school or like a UVM extension maybe in the future. The idea would be that generally speaking, just the way it's structured, the largest developments will tend to be a single employer or single institution occupying a building.
I was talking about this with somebody from the Bike Ped Committee.
Mhm.
And we're like, wow, we should try all of, the first whole list, should try all of that out on the school district because we've identified that they are the worst traffic generators on Dorset Street. And, and they're not talking, I don't know if they're talking, maybe they aren't talking about these things, but it would be great for the city to coordinate with the school district and like try these things out.
We would love to work with the school district on traffic.
Parents pick your kids up.
Yeah.
That's it.
They probably won't want to start with that. They probably won't want to start with that one, but that would be a good one. I've heard that they're encouraging bus use,
Put them on the bus.
which is good.
The line of parents.
And
Don't even get me going. Get me go down this.
yeah, and I've spoken
Move on.
a little preview. I've spoken with some representatives from GMT, and I think they share a pretty similar view. They would also like to move towards buses and work with the schools, and I think so. We're all very much on the same page there. Yep, that's actually would be an amazing test case if we could make that happen. So yeah, so okay, so where are we at with the flow chart? Right, so our applicant has received the news that they are a standard development. They have to mitigate 5%. They're also gonna have to pay some traffic impact fees. So at this point, our hypothetical applicant could choose a number of different TDM options from their list. They could select the ones that make the most sense for them. And then they could use the calculator that we will provide to determine whether or not those options meet the required amount of mitigation, and whether those options reduce their projected trips by the sufficient amount. If they do, then they can record all of that on the document that we are going to be using, a traffic management plan, to record all this information, submit it along with their zoning permit, and expect approval. If they don't, if they're the TDM options that they selected and would like to pursue do not mitigate their traffic impact by enough, then they would have the option of just spending more money at a higher rate per trip. estimating, or we're suggesting $10,000 per trip reduced, which would go into the same pool as traffic impact fees and would let them be released from the remaining obligation of mitigation. Or they could go back to the drawing board and select different options. Any applicant who wishes to exceed and go above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to mitigating their traffic impact we believe should get credit with a reduced traffic impact fee. We also suggest capping that reduction at a certain point so that you can't simply just put in 1,000 bike racks, pay no traffic impact fees, and be on your way. But we do believe that we should, we do recommend that the applicants should be given some opportunity to lower their traffic impact fees if they feel like they can do better than the minimums that we're requiring.
It should also be noted that the proposed capping of being able to use more TDM options is not just because of some maybe bad actor of doing 1,000, then just sort of getting out of all their fees. There's also traffic engineering science that's, according to our consultant, that haven't had it explained to me, but there is sort of diminishing returns when you're doing more things. You're never going to get everybody to use alternate transportation. Like, there's always going to be people who are driving. And at some point you're getting to the people who, there's the people who want to ride the bus, but may also bike. But then, if you start doing a lot of things, you start capturing the same people who may ride their bike, or is the person who might take a bus or might walk or might something else. And you're never going to capture everybody. So it's statistical that you're not going to be able to sort of go into all the way to 100% of your required trips with these TDM options, because there are diminishing returns on the additive properties.
Quick question, Nick.
Yeah.
So if I understand, you were talking about somebody whose project is under the standard level, anything green would not be available to them as an option?
Correct. Yeah. And that could change, but this is what we're putting forward now for discussion. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, what was the thought about excluding that for the lower category? It's not feasible. It's stuff they wouldn't do.
The issue is ongoing monitoring by the city. And now that we're on the subject, let's just switch on over to TDM options and talk about these. So, yeah, I'll take that on straight. The issue is that the city has limited capacity to be following up and making sure that, for instance, an employer is still buying bus passes for their employees, or that the childcare room that they said that they were going to build actually got built and is continued to be staffed and stuff like that. Now, we can always rely on an employee, blowing the whistle or something like that, and we do have the authority to issue violations or withhold other things from a property owner and permit holder, but that would still leave so that would take care of some potential violations, but it leaves a significant gap or significant potential for things to fall through the cracks. We want to shrink that gap as much as possible, and just take it easy on our development review team, our DRB, and our other staff, so that they don't have to spend all of their time making sure that the chargers are still working at like an e-bike corral or something like that. We pushed the more complicated and programmatic, the sort of ongoing TDM options into the large category with the logic based on the logic that a larger development like this is more likely to have auxiliary staff who could be filing ongoing reports and holding up their end of the monitoring, so that doesn't all fall to the city. It's much less likely that the neighborhood grocery, always full, is going to have that capacity than it would be that an OnLogic, or a Beta, the technologies might have that capacity. And so what we propose to do is to limit those ongoing programmatic operational sorts of TDM options to the ones that have the capacity to keep reporting on a regular basis and stay compliant in a proactive way. Not that we don't trust our smaller applicants, it's just that we recognize that by virtue of being smaller, they have less capacity. The other part of that the other logic supporting that is that larger, most of these operational ones have much higher impact at a higher scale. So having a car share car permanently available in the parking lot benefits the employees and customers of Always Full a lot less than it would benefit the employees and customers of OnLogic. There are far fewer people going to Always Full to use a car. And there are far fewer people who are going to be there and say, oh, I didn't drive, and it's raining now. I took the bus here, but I need to go pick up my kid because they're sick, and I can use the car share membership that is conveniently provided at my workplace. Same thing with, giving credit for an employee van pool or a CATMA membership or something like that. Just by concentrating employees and people tends to have higher returns when you apply some of these sorts of things to it than for smaller stuff.
Difference between these two? That
Oh, no,
Is there any difference?
I don't think there is. I put the entire slideshow as well as this particular table in the packet. Yeah,
I think it's in there twice.
it's yeah.
The flow chart, the flow chart, same thing, it's in there twice.
And
The answer is no. There's no difference between the two. It's just included twice. Yeah, yeah.
Lord?
Sorry about the confusion.
the maximum percentage reductions, if I need to lower my rates by 7%, do I just add up these until I get the 7%, or is there a compounding formula?
That's the idea. The compounding more goes in the opposite direction where it's a dampening. So
Yeah.
that, as Kelsey alluded to, having more options doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get everyone. So there is a dampening.
If I do a CAPMA membership and I get 10%, that's automatically putting me over the,
That's the proposal right now.
Okay.
We still have to talk with CATMA in greater detail about this. We've started conversations. I just got a very thoughtful email from Sandy Thibault tonight. I believe that's how I pronounce her name, and Thibault. And we are scheduling a longer and more detailed conversation with CATMA about how they would be willing and able to contribute to, especially to the green part of this.
So the other thing, just in this current proposal, the green is only available to the larges, and the large is required to get 14%.
Right.
So the CATMA won't like fully meet it
No,
because it's
I
in
do the
that
CAPMA
category.
and the childcare and I'm done.
Which,
Okay.
could go a pretty long way in
Yep.
terms of,
I'm just trying to understand
traffic.
how these work.
Yeah.
That's good.
And again, these numbers that we see are drawn up by our consultant. They're entirely subject to change, but they are drawn up by him based on his significant experience in traffic engineering and are based on manuals used nationwide. So there is a scientific rigor to this, although I should be clear, this is our policy. This is our city, your city. And so the actual performance of these is completely subject to change. We're just presenting the basic sort of like by the book numbers right now.
Mhm.
And I anticipate that the next part of this process, once we, wrap our minds around this collectively, once we're finished doing that, is to talk about how to sort of adjust those radio dials of what do we want to give credit for? What do we want to disincentivize? I'm looking forward to that conversation, but
Yeah, I really think that
On-site childcare should be 20%.
the consultant should be prepared to recognize that we don't have a lot of transit. You know,
yeah. And we have talked with him about that
40
a lot.
years ago, I lived in a city that
Yeah,
had great transit. I
yeah.
took it all the time.
Yeah,
I haven't taken it a lot.
yeah,
here, just because this is not a great transit.
yeah.
system.
Neither have I. Yeah.
An understatement.
Yeah, I mean, just so
What
I
transit?
understand, this is
Yeah,
not San
yeah.
Francisco.
Right, right.
Nick, a quick question, separate cost of parking from cost of rent, lease and ownership, how does that, is that impacting a tenant by making them pay more for parking? How does that work?
Yeah, the idea would be that you couldn't bundle parking with, and a developer who opts to not bundle parking with the cost of rent would be given TDM points. The idea being that that would allow people to save money by not having a car and would further incentivize not having a car by being able to save money. If you knew that there was a place that you could move where you didn't have to buy a parking space essentially or rent a parking space along with your apartment, that might allow a developer to further reduce the size of their parking lot or to just allow the market to determine what the actual cost of driving and parking would be.
Nick, is that this is my own question actually. Is that intended to be for residential?
It's intended to be for residential or for commercial. The idea it would be that someone driving to work might it would at work it would function basically like a cash out. So if you drive to if one of your benefits formerly had been getting a parking space, and you opt to take that as you could opt to take that as a cash out instead. We anticipate it would look a little bit different for the an office versus an apartment building, but the thing essentially is the same thing. We're disaggregating either pay or rent from parking.
I guess my question is who's assuming the cost of that, or who is getting charged the cost of that parking space? Where
That
is
would
that-
be that would be the tenant.
The tenant.
Yeah, that would be the tenant. If the tenant wants to opt to have a parking space, then they could do so. If they want to save money and not have a parking space, then they could also do so.
Is the assumption
So
that
you
if they
pay-
don't have a parking
you pay
place, they
your
don't have
rent.
a car?
And if you want to have a car, you got to pay
Oh,
rent
right.
for your
Okay,
car.
I'm just trying to see where the liability.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's $900 rent and it's $1,000 if you have a car.
Okay, all right.
Or words to that effect.
For an example.
While we're talking about this, I wanted to bring attention to a couple things that we have options for bus stop with shelter. This is an idea that, based on some recent conversations I've had with representatives at GMT, we would like to pursue, but going forward, we're going to recommend removing it from temporarily, at least from this list. The reason being is GMT is currently in the process of inventorying and analyzing their bus stop and amenity network. And we don't want to jump the gun on that, nor do we want to create additional burdens for our development review team and DRB in the absence of having stronger and more specific guidance from GMT. So while we anticipate and look forward to working with them and to adding this and to retaining this as an option, it is something that we are going to recommend reserving for the future when we move towards,
Right.
formal hearings.
Well, and it might be as we were talking before, that if it's on the city plan, there's a place where you need a bus
Yeah.
stop and you put one there.
Yeah.
And you get credit for it. The other thing I want to make a comment on is the rectangular rapid flashing beacons.
Yeah.
That those don't work real well. We have them, but people don't really stop at them. So, controlled pedestrian intersections
Mhm, mhm.
are a lot safer and a lot more effective.
Like
so.
a red light or
Yeah.
yeah.
The pedestrian presses a button and then they get a signal for
Mhm,
crossing that
mhm.
holds up the other lights.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and it's been suggested that we should eliminate all right turns on red in South Burlington because somebody's gonna get killed very soon.
That's a very interesting conversation.
Because there are too many people that just ignore stop on the right turn on red. They don't stop. They just right through.
Yeah.
Especially the new stop street right here. I've seen at least a dozen people go through it.
Rolling stop?
I hope personally, but
Nick, did you say you were going to delete the bus stop with shelter?
We want to reserve that until we get
Yeah,
more a
because
better
that's a
system.
question I had.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be something that would offer any mitigation because it's going to be on a bus route
Mhm.
anyway.
Mhm.
So
We don't have any.
I don't, yeah, we do. We've got bus shelters along here. Yeah, I have to walk a few miles to get a bus, but never mind.
Yeah. Well, as Donna mentioned, that might be the sort of thing that we plan out ahead of time location wise and would only apply to, half a dozen properties in the city. But, that's something that we just need more information from GMT before we make any decisions on giving credit for bus infrastructure. We do wish to offer credit for proximity to transit. So one of the things that we'll examine in a few minutes is the idea of giving like an upfront credit in terms of mitigation. So 10% of the trips that you must reduce would be automatically reduced if you build your project on an existing fixed route transit line. So, if someone built something on Williston Road or certain parts of Shelburne Road, they would get an automatic 10%
And what if
reduction.
if you're a quarter of a mile
That's another one.
from Shelburne Road, I mean, that's easy walking distance.
It
for
is
a lot
easy
of
walking.
people,
And we proposed a,
As long as there's a sidewalk.
as long as there's a sidewalk. We
I
proposed a
had-
quarter mile, or sorry, a 5% automatic reduction for quarter mile proximity. And our consultant recommended a 2% reduction for a half mile. But that's something I think we need to keep talking about.
I had the same question about the covered bike parking, whether that would really be useful as mitigation.
I think so.
Where?
At a commercial place, I mean, any place where you shop, if there's covered bike parking, because I've been down to Shaw's.
Yeah.
And they don't have covered bike parking and they tend to put their bike parking away from where the entrance is. And I'm a little nervous leaving a very expensive e-bike there. You know, I'd much rather it was covered and close to the doorway where more people are passing. So, I mean, I definitely think
Yeah.
covered bike parking.
I know the benefits. I grew up with covered bike storage at school for 200 plus bikes.
Mhm.
So I know the benefits, but I don't know how you would calculate it. Anyway,
So actually, you raised a very good point, which is what are the design standards for some of these things? We're talking about a lot of physical infrastructure. The answer is I'm still working on drafting the actual language of some of these, but we had an intern do some great research into things like cargo bike optimized parking. And she came up with some great suggestions for that. And we're going to be incorporating those in. But
That's true, because it just says sheltered. It doesn't say where it is.
yes.
Where it is really important.
Yes, it is important. So the sort of current idea is to mimic our LDRs, which do address the location for bike parking vis-a-vis the front entrance. So try to sort of piggyback off of those sections of the LDRs, as well as to set design standards for what constitutes cargo bike optimized parking, what is e-bike optimized parking. So far, that basically means an outlet within 6 feet of a bike parking space. So we are thinking about some of those. Let's see. Another idea for sheltered short-term bike parking would be to limit the credit that you get to that for having, to say like you would have to build out a certain number of spaces in order to get credit for that. So we would their suggestion right now is probably 10 spaces. You have to build 10 spaces fully covered by an awning that extends a certain number of feet past the edge of the space. And those would be enshrined in our LDRs and applied towards these. Any other questions about the TDM options? Happy to linger on these for a little bit in case folks.
The other question, is there anything that jumps out to you as being missing?
Yes, thank you, Kelsey.
I'm sorry. As being what?
Missing? Something that you think that a site, whether residential or commercial or whatever, should be allowed to install or have as a program or put into their site design in some way that should be
Yes.
credited in this?
Yes, but I had it at the end where do we have any questions or suggestions?
Yeah, we can put that at the end.
As mitigators, as I had written down, maybe free e-bike charging,
Mm-hmm.
and or free or discounted EV charging, although that doesn't necessarily reduce VMT, but it does reduce emissions.
Does reduce emissions. Yep.
So there's a benefit.
Yeah. We have thought about EV charging. We decided to leave it out for the time being because, we're trying to keep this policy fairly narrowly tailored towards reducing car trips in general, whether those are electrically or fossil fuel-ly powered. As for the earlier, e-bike, yes, I think part of the idea of e-bike optimized bike parking would be a mandate to provide that for free, because having charged an e-bike for over a year, I think it made exactly zero difference in my electricity bill.
Yeah.
They are they're practically free. So yeah, we would mandate that you can't charge
But if the
limit.
project has on-site EV charging, then you are saving VMTs because you don't have to drive up to Healthy Living to get charged or somewhere else.
That is true. That is true.
One thing it might be a little harder to figure out how many points it deserves, but particularly for a larger commercial development or, something the scale of the U-Mall or anything where it's mixed use is just a design that is just more pedestrian friendly.
Mhm.
Lori's brought this up on
Mhm.
several occasions
Mhm.
that, we keep showing examples of things that are very car centric.
Yeah, yeah.
And, there's a lot of examples around the country of developments that have de-emphasized the cars,
Mhm.
particularly residential, keeping the parking kind of peripheral.
Yep, yep.
You know, just de-emphasizing the vehicles. It's still accessible, but um, ma- making developments much more pedestrian friendly in general, particularly large developments.
It's an interesting idea.
And minimizing the amount of roadway on the site.
Yeah.
Keeping the cars
Yeah.
near the road, letting people walk the rest of the property.
Yeah.
Except for, whatever handicap accessibility. you need.
Mhm, mhm.
But, because I don't see anything in any LDRs that say, think about people first and keep the cars, minimize the amount of cars on the. side.
Yeah, we do have some, I would argue that we do have a certain amount of that ethos baked into into the LDRs through things such as, the de facto ban on drive-throughs and through having eliminated parking minimums. But there may be more that we can do from an incentive
Yeah.
side to push developers to voluntarily adopt more.
Not having parking in the front.
Not having parking in the front would be a great place to start, certainly. Oh, we have that. Oh, well, look at that. We're way ahead of things.
Yeah, we not allowing parking in the front, requiring residential units to face the street instead of facing something else, requiring garages to not be in the front of
That's right.
residential units.
Yeah.
There are a sprinkling of things, but it could be more systematized.
Nick, I had a question on the percentages, and I just said this to Lori. Given our dearth of childcare, on-site childcare, shouldn't that count for a lot more than 4%?
This is one of those radio dials that we can,
I mean, that's the radio dial that
Crank
should be
up.
turned up to 11.
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
That-
I mean, that,
You're 11.
yeah, I mean, that, to me, that should,
Yeah.
Somebody with a large project should look at that, and go, no brainer, bingo. I don't know if that's increasing the percentage, but I would certainly vote for that.
That would probably be the first place to start.
Yeah.
Would be to increase the value.
There you go.
Can you explain the parking cash out option for employees with free parking at work?
Oh, yeah, that would be the work equivalent of what we talked about earlier with disaggregating rent from parking, a parking spot. The idea here would be that if you, like here, if you are entitled to a parking spot in a certain lot, just by virtue of being an employee, if you give up that option, if you opt out of that, then you should be entitled to a cash out, a payment. And that has been used fairly successfully in a number of different settings in the past. Not so much around here as far as I know, but we'd like to incentivize it, and that's why we proposed it.
Has there been any discussion with car sharing and the Car Share Vermont, I guess is the local one, about their ability and willingness to expand to other commercial sites?
No. We haven't, not as part of this process, at least.
Yeah, because I think it would be helpful to know, what resources are available for that.
Yeah.
Because it seems like a good idea, but it seems like you also have to be downtown to take advantage of it because that's where they are.
Yeah,
And
at
I
the
think
moment,
that's
yeah,
The only.
at the
place where
moment,
they are.
yeah, there's a few pretty near my place in the south end. That would be one that would be worth following up on, see if we can, if they would have any interest in expanding. I did speak, not in regards to this, with their director at a conference a while back. So I do know that they would like to, they have an eye on expansion in the
Yeah.
future.
I think there's almost the opposite because, they have all very efficient electric cars and
Mhm.
stuff and hybrids. I think as more people get an EV,
Mhm.
you have the need for the opposite. You need a vehicle that can go 500 miles and tank
Mhm,
gas
mhm, mhm.
efficiently.
Right.
But you need
right.
a long, because people just don't have long range vehicles.
Right.
If you only have one EV,
Right.
you sometimes you just need I would love to be able to cheaply rent.
Yeah.
A car,
Yeah.
to do that, except I kept my other car for the time being.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting idea. I
Um,
saw it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we've certainly, you've heard plenty from the first four people here. How about the last two people there? Any, Paul or Fran?
So it looks like there's nothing here really accounts for the type of business. It's mostly just the square feet of commercial area.
Yeah.
So is there a way to have a benefit for some kind of synergies? Maybe you got, say, 10,000 square feet, but you're going to put two businesses in there, but the people that come to business A are most likely also to go to business B. So there's some synergy between those two types of business.
Yeah, yeah.
Can we
Yes.
accomplish that somehow?
And I'm really glad you asked because that's the perfect segue into our case studies, which gives us a little bit of a peek under the hood. Mike, you want to throw something in before we get to those?
Anybody? else?
Okay.
Paul?
Paul?
Well, I had a more global question that I wanted to ask earlier. And that is, we've talked a lot about carrying capacity. And it seems that we really aren't getting the idea of carrying capacity. That, we're not looking at more development brings us more of these needs for education, for transportation, for public services. And we continually, like we are in this discussion, are trying to reform or fix the transportation system without really addressing the development system. And so I would prefer, greatly prefer an approach more looking at development and its impact on transportation than, trying to respond to continuing what I think of as overdevelopment of South Burlington and its impact on the transportation system. That would be my thought.
Are you saying that new development will actually offset whatever we save in this transportation demand? Or some of it anyway?
New development.
Yeah. I mean, continued.
I mean, if we were to stop development, maybe we could save our transportation system. I guess that's what I'm saying, that we just merrily go along our way with development and then
the demand is there.
Then what are we going to do about transportation? How do we, reconcile this? Because, we haven't really, as far as I'm concerned, done much in the last couple generations to have much of an impact on the one car, one driver system that seems to be overwhelmingly prevalent in the United States anyway.
So, I'll acknowledge this may not be the most aggressive version of a policy that seeks to limit exactly what you talked about, the growth of single car, single driver transportation, a system based in that. But I would argue that what this does is kind of what you're talking about in that it addresses the transportation, the added demand on our transportation system at the development level. So this process seeks to intervene at a point when development has not yet occurred, and to make sure that the development money that will flow into that development is at least making room for people who want to or might someday want to travel outside of a car. We could, ban parking lots. We could ban driveways for new development, but I think all of us know that would be a political non-starter. And so,
No.
this is an attempt to try to reconcile, pressures that we're feeling on the development side with the inevitabilities of development in a capitalist system. So,
Nick, before you leave this chart, I had a question about the compressed work week.
Yeah.
Because I've actually done it. We switched from 5 days, 40 hours to 4 days, 40 hours. That's a 20% reduction in commuting to work.
Mhm.
And you've got, what you're allowing is what, 3.5%?
Yeah.
Is that enough of an incentive?
Well, I don't want to throw our consultant under the bus, but again, this is based on his,
Sorry,
on-
2%.
yeah, this is based on his, I think that reflects the dampening effect of having, of some of these policies where, yes, you could switch over to have a 4-day week. Most people would take advantage of that. Not every single person is going to. They may need to be maintenance staff that go to the building on some of those days. So, we unfortunately, oftentimes like reductions in for something, a metric such as days worked per week or square footage or something like that don't translate directly into reduction in vehicle trips. So again, these numbers are based on research that was performed by other engineers. We're kind of taking their word for it and going with because that is the best available data that we have, and it's what cities all over the country use. But again, I'll return to this is our community, and ultimately these numbers as well as the options presented are subject to change, and that may be because we feel like we know something that they don't. So, and that could well be the case.
How easy would it be to add or change these things? Would it require changes in the LDRs, which would require a public hearing, yada, yada, yada?
So we've explored a couple options for that. The default would be to enshrine these in the LDRs, and then that would require the statutory process for changing an LDR. The other option that we're kind of excited about would be to enshrine these in a resolution that could be passed more easily or changed more easily by council.
How about administrative?
Kelsey, I'm going to turn to you here.
I think administrative would be more difficult, just because of the effect that it would have on development. It is a policy decision. It's not something that administrative is generally things that you would have to change without discretion. So if your LDR says that the impact fees go up with inflation, every year an administrator could do that. They wouldn't need it. But these are all policy decisions that would require some person in an elected or appointed body to do it.
If it's okay, I would like to keep moving on to the case studies. I don't think we need to linger on these particularly long, but we had our consultant draw these up. We kind of gave him some scenarios and said, okay, we'll just start with the first one. We kind of gave him the proposals that you read here at the top, and then he generated the numbers that follow based on how the policy has been written so far. Again, this is all subject to change, but this is intended to give you a good idea of how the policy is written would function if applied to real world development scenarios that we're dealing with or have dealt with recently. So in this case, we have a standalone building. So you can imagine something like, I've talked about always full, but you could also imagine a number of different freestanding buildings along, so let's say Williston Road or Dorset Street.
Very many of them.
Half a dozen or so. Yeah. We have a lot of shopping center stuff, and
Shopping centers.
and that is something that we worked closely with our consultant to find a solution for. So but this one would be sort of an example of the simplest option. It clearly falls under the size requirements. It's a small, as long as they are doing what they need to do to comply with the LDRs that already exist in terms of, adding bike racks or whatever, they're good to go. We would calculate trips on the expansion so that we could assess impact fees. If they wanted to reduce those impact fees, they would be allowed to by adding some of the options that were shown on the previous table. A slightly different version of this would be, well, not really. That we're holding that case study for later. This one would be an existing approved PUD, single family homes primarily have the option for some commercial space. They want to add commercial space in a grocery store. This would be something that would happen at, like, let's say phase 2 of a master plan. So the houses are being built out. And then phase 2 comes along, it's time to build out the commercial. That at that point, we would perform the TDM analysis and assess traffic impact and do the rest of the process, mitigate and pay some fees. This one shows how there would be 2 different options. They could pay the TDM reduction fee at 1.7 trips left unmitigated. That'd be $17,000. They could also just find some more TDM options. There would be a number of things that would probably be a lot cheaper than $17,000 that they could choose. So we would expect that in a scenario like this, that's what they would do. Third option would be a mixed-use building similar to the kinds that are being built along Market and Garden Street. It goes in on Williston Road. Let's say, for the sake of example, it's the corner of White Street and Williston Road. Something like this would be it would be a greenfield development, so it would be going from 0 permitted trips, unless, of course, there had been some kind of use approved prior to that. But we gave our consultant the challenge of, this is an unused lot. It has no prior approval of no prior trip budget. So we're going from 0 trips to however many it's projected to generate. That was more for the example, just for the purposes of illustration. So for this one, we would have, 35 trips after mitigation left for the impact fee. This one would be subject to the automatic 10% credit in reduction for being on a transit route. And then finally, this one was intended to model what would happen if, another OnLogic were to set up shop in South Burlington. So you can imagine we set an animation studio. Yeah. So Pixar Northeast decides to set up in Vermont, and they chose Community Drive. This is more or less what we would be looking at in terms of the TDM process for their permitting. So if there are no questions, I'm just going to move on to the questions that I have for you folks. We've talked about a lot of these already. Yeah. So
Mentioned, what about adding? What about adding on-site free e-bike charging as a mitigation option? And the other one was on-site free or discounted EV charging. But obviously it doesn't reduce vehicle miles traveled, but does reduce GHG.
they do.
emissions. And if that would be for a commuter.
That's an interesting one. I will bring it before our consultant and see if anyone has studied what happens when you add EV charging. To see if it does, based on the fact that EV charging isn't as convenient or as widespread as gas stations, it may have that a reduction in vehicle miles traveled associated with it. So that's absolutely something worth bringing to the consultant. John Slayson, I want to be clear, he has a name and he's been very, very helpful. I keep calling him our consultant. Jonathan Slayson has been very, very helpful. What I will close with is just a quick update. I mentioned that I've been talking with GMT. They are in the midst of moving into collecting fares. And so they are going to be not available for, their staff won't be quite as available as they had hoped for policy review and input. But we will be working with them over the coming weeks and months to get what feedback they are able to provide. The bus stop TDM option is something that we are going to recommend tabling for the time being. But what we are hoping to do with GMT's support is to confirm the credit reduction, the reduction credit for proximity to fixed route transit in this initial route or in this initial series of conversations, and then leave room, even if we cannot get more detailed feedback from GMT or they simply don't have more detailed feedback to give us, then what we're hoping to do is to pass this set of policies in a form that would allow us to quickly add on new language and new options to allow applicants to coordinate with GMT as they develop their site amenity policies, maybe change routes, that sort of thing. That's why we mentioned the alternative ways of passing this policy, other than the LDR, something that would be a little bit easier to edit.
Donna?
Well, I just, on the third question, he's asked for additional groups to connect with. Seemed like surrounding towns would be important to connect with. And particularly one of the things that came up was more park and ride. option. And, you know, if there was, you know, it seems to work hand in hand with a city loop bus.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that if you had points along the perimeter where people could park and if they could easily get a loop bus that goes around every 15 minutes, that starts to work.
Yeah, yeah.
That really starts to work. And, but with surrounding towns, you know, it's like, what about them collecting people before they drive to South Burlington? And, you know, how
Interesting idea.
just
Yeah,
coordinating some microtransit options.
Yeah. Noted.
With surrounding towns, senior centers, you know, senior center, it's like, and gyms. Gyms, it's like everybody, oh, my partner actually brought this up. This was in Middlebury, he went to this and he's like, every parking space was taken, but the gym didn't seem to be full, except the pool. They had, you know, water aerobics going on.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, there's certain classes
Yeah, yeah.
that happen and, you know, it's just like, how do you know, they're all people that are going to the same place.
Yeah.
But I don't know where they're all coming from.
Your
But-
part, yeah,
but,
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
what kind of microtransit options can work with,
Use sheep dogs.
well, I know senior centers already have kind of.
Yes, yes, they do.
microtransit,
They
so
do.
They
do.
already have daycare centers.
Yep, yep.
Daycare centers might be a tough one because kids don't want to deal with strangers.
Yeah, Lori?
I just had one other about possible additions. For larger employers like Beta and other large employers, is a employee-owned bus system an option?
Yeah,
Anything to
so
consider.
I don't remember if it was
I
on
don't
the
remember seeing
list,
it on there.
but we have
You had something about van pool or something.
yes.
Yeah.
So that would be the van pool option.
Okay.
And you know, we're also part of the other thing that we were talking about, other partners to talk with, and yeah, school district CATMA, we're really interested in talking with CATMA to see what their thoughts are on exactly that about, you know,
And
employee.
UVM has such a system.
Yeah, they've been crucial in helping to foster those systems, and we're at the moment not entirely sure what they would say about this. So we're gonna wait to see what they have to say about this and how some of those systems that they have helped to put together in the past might be plugged into this. Those might show up as TDM options, discrete TDM options, or it might just be lumped under the sort of membership in CATMA sort of thing. But we're gonna figure that out.
All right.
I had one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
If you could explain how the cash out option is calculated and to be significantly higher enough to incentivize taking mitigation options.
We don't have a calculation for that at the moment. That's along with bike parking, you know, physical standards. That's one of the things that we have left to calculate.
All right. I think you got plenty of feedback.
I think I got a
On that?
lot of feedback. I really appreciate everyone.
Brian, you've got your hand up. Go ahead. Sure, please.
Ryan Doyle, I had a few questions for staff. So this is a separate fund. Is it just called a TDM fund?
Oh, that like traffic impact fees get paid into.
Yeah.
Those are already being collected. Those go into a fund that works with our capital improvement fund. And we anticipate that those and the cash out fees would continue going into that same fund.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the map, and I've probably mentioned this before, but we're looking at Heinsberg Road, possibly that route being removed.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
on Route 7, in your circle blurb, it actually goes further up because South Burlington's on one side of the road. We have stops by the post office and Hadley Road. But one of my concerns with that is sometimes stops aren't that close together.
Yeah,
On
yeah.
Shelburne Road. And it's also a very wide street with stops on both sides. And so I would be concerned about, something going in down past the car dealerships on one side of the road. And maybe it's within a quarter mile of Shelburne Road, but the opposite side of the street bus stop might be a third or half a mile away.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing, and making
Yeah.
sure that it's actually within a quarter mile of the bus stops in both directions.
Yeah.
As part of
Yeah.
the requirements. Regarding like a single family home developments, is there a minimum number of homes that would not have to do anything, not have to pay any impact fee?
They would have to pay impact fees. Everything has to pay impact, is potentially subject to impact fees. There is anything that would be counted as a small development would be exempt from having to do mitigation. So a smaller development, someone building their own home or something like that would be essentially exempt from TDM requirements, insofar as they would be treated the same way a neighborhood grocery adding 500 square feet would be treated. They would have to do the minimum site requirements. They would have to pay any traffic impact fees that were assessed. And then they would have to follow all the other various rules that they would need to in order to get a zoning permit.
Okay.
Then that would scale up for larger stuff.
Because one of the things I think about with single family home development, am I too close to the mic?
No, you're good. Yeah.
Is they're not all the same, right? Like I live in a post-war neighborhood with, most of the homes are like 1,200 square feet,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But when we look at the southeast quadrant, we actually see some like estates, so you see homes with 4-car garages, or large paved cul-de-sac driveways.
Yeah.
And parking pads. And when I think about just the amount of impervious surface devoted to cars, even though you kind of expect, even if you have a 4-car garage, you shouldn't be making more trips, but at the same time, it's having a really bad environmental impact just by paving over so much and devoting so many resources towards vehicular storage. And I wonder if there's a way to assess vehicular area of a development or house differently from projected use, because a small 1,200 square foot house for one family and a 4,500 square foot house for one family, theoretically the same number of trips, but if one has triple the area of the other home devoted to car storage,
Mhm.
that seems like it could maybe be assessed at a higher level.
Yeah.
Just
Hmm,
for
that's an
thought
interesting
for
idea.
everyone on the commission as well to think about in other capacities as we assess things. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. All right, Don.
I'm just gonna show this to Nick. And just a
Oh, yes.
a modification to his little transportation site map. So connecting this part of the loop and this part of the loop and then extending out. It seems like that's a more complete view of what we need.
Yeah, it would be. And Ryan mentioned, the idea of the potential of the Heinsberg Road bus, which currently exists, to change or maybe disappear. That map was drawn up initially. I included it because it was it is technically part of what we're considering right now, but that is one of the things that we are targeting for change following our conversations with GMT. And I also want to address what Ryan mentioned about the proximity of stops to development. Right now, what we're recommending is to give a blanket credit for proximity to development, with the idea that we're going to have both more information about where stops are going to be located in the near future, but also that we're going to have more potential ridership. The idea about this is to help to stimulate development along areas where we know that there could be where there's high potential for ridership, while we refine where like the best way to incorporate this into more targeted collaborations between developers, the city, and GMT. So the idea, I think, is to not keep it as a blanket, is to refine that, so that 10% credit down to proximity to, let's say, a planned or existing bus stop, rather than just like where the street along which the bus travels.
Given that, would it make sense to add one of the options as crosswalk improvements near adjoining or adjacent bus stops?
It's much more difficult to do something like that because it is in the right of way.
Gotcha.
And that's really in the purview of DPW and sometimes the state, depending on what street you're dealing with.
So this is where the traffic impact fees and the buyout come into place, because that's the sort of project that we might want to take on anyway, and may even be stimulated because of a new development that has been permitted. We might say, oh, well, now that there's 250 people living here, we're probably going to need a crosswalk at this mid-block crossing. And then that stuff obviously doesn't come free. And that is why we charge traffic impact fees and allow people to buy out.
Yeah, good example of bus stops and impact, transportation impact is Allen Road. And there's a public meeting coming up. I
Yeah,
think next
yeah.
Bike and Ped meeting, or sometime next week. There's something about Allen Road coming up.
Yeah, I believe
That's
the
a-
bike path
That's a
meeting. Yeah.
That's a very much neglected street.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
pedestrian, because there is a bus stop there,
Yeah.
but
there
there's
is.
no sidewalk
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get to it.
Bike path and then a sidewalk. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there's no bike path there either.
Yeah.
The bike path ends up the hill because
Right,
there's
right,
this
Right.
culvert there and we couldn't get across the culvert, and then there's a house that's close. Anyway, but yeah, that's a place where, you know, a lot of access, because there's tons of family, or there's a lot of units
There are.
right
Yeah.
around
yeah.
there, and it's just really lacking. So
Yeah.
I think it's next
Okay.
week's time.
I'm going to play time cop here.
Yep.
We're done with that.
We are.
On to the next one. EV charging, for a conversation with staff earlier, it looks like this was presented to the Energy Committee, but they weren't able to finish their conversation on it.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is more on the informational side right now,
Mhm.
to be given to us. And then I think, Chelsea, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is more feedback when we get the finished feedback from the Energy Committee.
Primarily, yes. Yep. And Nick also has put this piece together as well. Is there anything in particular that you wanted to present to the Planning Commission today, or is it fine to wait for additional feedback from the Energy Committee? Or is it just sort of updating on the state?
This is more of an update on the new state standards. I would be happy to run through this real fast. I don't think it would take too long for us to, kind of get ourselves up to speed on it, and then we can have a more detailed discussion after Energy weighs in. Would that be?
Well, I tell you, let's have Nick do his presentation and let's take questions until afterwards. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
We share up a screen and we'll make it quick. So basically the state has two different codes. Those codes are the RBES and the CBES. I think some of us are familiar with these. The RBES is Residential Building Energy Standards. CBS is Commercial Building Energy Standards. These are efficiency and energy efficiency and thermal efficiency standards for new construction. The update that is germane to the Planning Commission's work and the Energy Committee's work is that now these codes include minimums for the procurement of EV-enabled or EV charging provided parking spaces. So parking spaces where there is infrastructure which you can use to charge an EV, or infrastructure that you can use to install a charger to charge an EV. And there's pretty important distinction between those two, and that's kind of what we should be probably talking about. So, yeah, a couple definitions. We have the EVSE, that's electric vehicle supply equipment. It's both a generic term, but both these documents also refer to sort of the like a functional, ready to go, literally plug and play EV charger. So one of the Tesla chargers that we would see over at Healthy Living would be counted as an example of EVSE. Though again, it is also a generic term, which just means sort of EV charger. Then we've got EVSE space. It includes a dedicated EV connection. And then the more important two definitions would be EV ready and EV capable. EV ready, less important. We'll come back to that. EV capable is the one I want to focus on. EV capable, please take this to mean a parking space that has conduit running to it from the building that the parking space serves. And inside that building, that conduit leads to a panel with enough space to add the circuitry necessary to supply an EV charger. So it's all the infrastructure that you need to put in an EV charger, except for the charger and the wiring that wires the charger to the building, and some other electrical equipment that I, as a policy person, don't quite understand. But the point is basically the limiting factor so far has been, especially with retrofits, has been the fact that in order to put EV charging in most parking lots, you would have to tear up the parking lot. An EV capable space is a space that is engineered to avoid having to do that. It's something that any electrician could come in and wire up to have an EV charger at one end and all the electrical safety equipment at the other end. So these new code updates establish minimums for the different spaces, for parking spaces that are to be served by these various types of EV equipment. So single family home, well, really all residential, it's pretty simple. It's one per dwelling unit and the number of parking spaces provided, whichever is less. And then anything, if the number of parking spaces exceeds the number of dwelling units, then 25% of the additional parking spaces beyond the number of dwelling units must be EV capable. And we're talking about EV capable. We're not talking about electric. We're not talking about EVSE. We're not talking about built out spaces that are ready to plug a car into. This goes for single family or small multifamily. The formula is exactly the same in CBES, but the CB's code applies to multifamily buildings. So when we talk about RBs, we're really just talking about single family homes and duplexes. I do want to highlight, and Donna wanted us to talk about the energy standards. This is the CB, this is the CB standards. This is a little more complicated and a little bit more detailed than the RBs because it breaks out commercial buildings by type rather than just, talking about one type of building. Then each of the building types has different numbers for EV space procurement associated with it.
Can I suggest something that needs to be added to this?
Sure.
There's no mention anywhere about which types of buildings should have a fast charging station.
Yeah, so fast charging is optional, though it does count for 3 spaces. So there's a level 3 charging. These are just state minimums. So
kinds of places,
Mhm.
Because when you're traveling intercity,
Mhm.
people need to stop.
Mhm.
We happen to be about the right distance from Montreal.
Mm-hmm,
So people are going to need fast charging stations because lots of people in Montreal have EVs.
So
If you want to get to Boston,
yeah.
they have a gap in Burlington.
Yeah.
There are very, very few fast charging stations in Burlington.
So let's put a pin in that because that illustrates one of the things, the possible actions we could take with this information. This information, again, is just what the state has now decided are the minimums. This is not South Burlington policy. This will be enforced by the state regardless of what we do. This is now the floor for providing EV charging at parking spaces in Vermont. The question that we are still working out with, we're putting before the Energy Committee and that will eventually be returned to this body is, are these sufficient? We really can't weigh in on whether they're excessive, but we can ask ourselves whether these are sufficient or whether maybe in a more nuanced way of putting that, are these targeted in the way that we wish them to be targeted? So, Don, to your point, it seems like you're of the opinion that this does not provide enough sufficient minimums for level 3 charging.
No, there's no mention.
There are no, there are no minimums, right. So that is something that the city of South Burlington could consider adding as our own local minimum. We could add that. We could also further incentivize, we would further incentivize people voluntarily putting them in by adding more bonuses.
The federal tax credit
There are federal tax credits.
now,
Mm-hmm,
it pretty much applies everywhere in Vermont, I think.
mm-hmm.
Maybe or maybe not in South Burlington. We're considered rural.
Yeah.
And so I think it probably applies here.
Yeah.
Get free charges from Green Mountain Power.
Only if you buy an E EV.
Is there,
Yeah.
is there a way to, or I don't know how this ties in with what Donna was saying, but in a lot of places there are banks of EV chargers that are almost like gas stations.
Yeah.
Is there any provision for anything like that in the state regs at this point or no?
Not as far as I can tell. That is an interesting conversation that I've started to talk with folks about internally and with the Energy Committee about, there may be some need for a land use category equivalent to a gas station or something like that, but specific to EV charging. And that's probably something we should be starting to talk about. It's a little outside the bounds of this, and to answer your question, the state does not have any particular programs. This update does not address that. No.
Well,
I-
it kind of goes along with the type of building use, because any place you have a place where you have to charge for half an hour, you want to have someplace you can do something for half an hour, which retails and restaurants tend to lend themselves to that.
Yep.
For sure.
It's my understanding that dealerships that sell EVs
Mhm.
are required
Hmm.
to have charge stations accessible to the public,
Interesting.
and that should be checked.
And they're level 3.
And they have to be level 3. Interesting. Okay.
By the way, it's level 3 gives you 4 EVSEs.
4. Yes. Excuse me. I was saying 3. Yes.
Then
4,
my
yes.
last question is, what's the minimum requirement? State requirement, because there's a list of options here, some of which are more intense than others.
Mhm.
So how are you going to coordinate what to give a developer as a mitigation option when he's required
Oh,
to do
well,
something?
these wouldn't interact with TDM mitigation. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Yeah, these don't interact with TDM mitigation. These are just minimums for how many EV spaces that a developer has, that someone has to put in when they
So in a TDM, then we could not offer any of these as mitigation options.
we're not recommending that at the moment.
Well, I did, so I'll withdraw.
And as promised, I will have our consultant, Jonathan Slayson, look into whether TDM, like EV charging, has been used as a TDM option before and what you might recommend that be counted as. But for the moment, we are recommending keeping those sort of separated. And this is just really an update on what the state is mandating versus what we are offering as incentives. I want to just keep moving in the interest of time to talk a little bit about how this interacts with our policies, just to keep it local. We have a number of different planning documents and city policies that talk about EV charging, and most of them say we need to have more of it. This policy would actually have some impact on our progress towards those goals. Specifically in the transportation, the implementation plan for the climate action plan, we have called on ourselves to think up a policy for EV charging procurement at new development. This potentially fulfills that requirement, at least for the time being. By the state mandating that, so all new buildings will have infrastructure for EV charging if they want to get their RVs or their CVs. That is non-negotiable. So we can rest assured that T 1.2 will have been at least somewhat addressed by virtue of that standard now existing. So, a policy, not a South Burlington specific policy, but a policy with the authority of the state of Vermont behind it now exists or will starting on July 1st to, that would move us towards that goal.
You just have to understand that RVs have never been enforced.
And that is an issue that
And
we,
and it's an issue that there's a lot of people, including builders,
Mhm.
are trying, there's two bills now.
Mhm.
In the legislature, I think they're called 792 and 793.
okay.
And state bill, Senator Bray has a bill.
Mhm.
That a lot of 792, which is Scott Campbell's bill, is we're trying to translate that into the Senate bill.
Okay.
That is Senator Bray's, to actually create the Department of Public Safety
I see. Yeah.
as the, we're not calling them an enforcement arm.
Yeah.
Just the administrative, the administrative center
Sure.
for RB.
Sure,
So
sure.
that over time, so we can build compliance,
Mhm.
At least raise the level of compliance, because right now RB's compliance is somewhere around 50%.
Yeah.
Wide.
It's not great. I will,
Better in South Burlington, I think, but
I would hope so. Yeah.
we have bigger builders here.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Bigger builders tend to be more compliant.
Yeah. So the good news is the piece of optimism I can offer for the RBs is that the RBs requirements are incredibly low. When we talk about,
for
compared to, just to remind everyone that the requirement for an EV capable space, which is the minimum for required now under RBs, is conduit to the space, which can be in a garage, and then sufficient space on the panel to put in the rest of the charging
Which
equipment.
for a large
So,
building is not minimal. I mean, that's
yeah.
You're gonna have a lot more panel capacity.
Yeah, for a large house, you're adding to your,
For
and
multi-
for
sure.
but for a multifamily, that would fall under CVs. And we do know that we have a better compliance rate with CVs and the state is more
Yeah.
involved in that. So the good news is that this is something that would, while we don't have, I can't offer you lots of promises that we'll suddenly be able to enforce RVs the way some of us, I think a lot of people would like us to. The good news is compliance with this new mandate under RVs should be very simple. And also should be a selling point for builders going forward, because if you're not able to offer a EV charging in your brand new house built in 2024, not really sure what you're doing, but either way, they're going to have to put it in there. So because it is now state law, or it will be on July 1st. The other thing that what I will leave you folks with is, again, this is a floor. This is a minimum that the state will mandate, it has, regardless of what we do. And we now have the opportunity to add on to that, to plan for the future, add-ons or modifications. And I think that is what I would respectfully ask the commission to consider over the next couple weeks, especially once we come back from having finished our review with the Energy Committee. Is there anything more that we feel that we should be doing? Is there areas where this standard falls short of the goals that we've articulated in some of these documents? And what can we do about that if we have identified such a shortfall?
So when would we see this again?
Energy Committee meets again on the 8th, I believe, of February. So should be able to summarize. I'm not sure what else Kelsey has and Paul have planned for mid-February, but we'd be ready. We should be ready to discuss at any point after that.
You may be able to see it on the second meeting in February, because the 8th falls after the packet deadline for the first meeting.
Okay. Any other questions, counselors? Commissioners? No? Okay. All right, on to item 7, I believe. Approving the change in the city plan. Kelsey, do you want to
Yeah, so the city plan 2024, the city council made a few edits at their last, as I said, they have a third hearing now because they made edits at the last hearing. So this is the same process as before, where the planning commission has the responsibility to update the report that accompanies the city plan when the report goes to the state and explains like this is how it complies with all of these state goals and everything else. The only things that have changed in the report are the things that are red line changes in your packet. And those are all directly responsive to the changes that were made by city council. So it is the planning commission's role at this point to approve the report as amended, and then it can go to city council for their third public hearing on the 29th, hopefully for the city council to approve the plan and the report at that point. It's an adoption
move-
report, so it has to go with that.
I move to approve the report as amended and presented in tonight's package.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, I think that was unanimous.
No.
No?
One no.
Oh, one no? All right, I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Moved and then you voted
I-
against it?
I can
Oh,
prove
okay, all right. Well, we have 5 in favor and 1 not in favor.
we want.
Yeah,
Get it done.
all right. And I believe, sorry, go back up to the, so minutes. We have the minutes of December 12th. I know everybody's read them.
Move to approve
We have a
The-
second.
planning commission minutes of December the 12th, 2023.
I'll second.
All right, everybody in favor?
Aye.
There.
So you're gonna be the stick in the mud. That's- You can do whatever you want. Ellen.
Would you like to abstain? though?
One abstain now? Okay, well, we have 5 and 1 abstention.
Okay.
Other business, Michael, I know you had something you want to talk about.
Yes, I had brought up at our last meeting the idea of workforce housing in the IO districts, and we really didn't discuss it in any meaningful way. So I'd like to add it to a planning commission agenda.
Can
in-
I clarify something in your request? I think at the last meeting, the discussion was made that for the purposes, because of the implications of S100, we would be removing residential. The commission wanted to remove residential uses for now from the IO. And then currently, commercial oriented areas like the mixed IC district, for example, do not allow residential uses. But there's been discussion that was originally prompted by OnLogic's request about temporary housing, workforce housing, commercial related housing in some of those areas that do not currently allow for any kind of residential. So I don't think the conversation was about IO necessarily. It was about some of these areas that don't allow any residential now, and the IO district would for this period right now the residential use would be removed from the IO to not complicate S100 while we start that conversation.
So because it currently is 3.
Yeah.
It's
It's one-
one house per 3 acres.
Yes.
But yeah,
So it's kind of taking that out to not have an inadvertent effect in that area because S100 is in effect now.
so could we come back to it in April, say?
Absolutely.
So then I have a motion to make then that I would move that a planning commission agenda for a planning commission meeting to be held during the month of April 2024 include consideration of mixed uses in the IO. And now, question for you, which other districts would sort of fit into this conversation?
I think mixed IC is the primary.
IO and mixed IC?
That would be primarily our future land use map when we added that purple color of mixed uses. That was mostly in the mixed IC. We didn't want to include some areas like C1 air that are closer to the airport.
Then in the IO and mixed IC districts, including workforce housing and that staff prepare and present at that meeting draft ideas or language to allow for such uses.
I guess my question to Kelsey would be, how does that jive with
I would
Azar in terms of,
I would love for that to not be for an April meeting, but maybe as soon as practicable after the LDR amendments currently being discussed. Because it's possible that we, with some other feedback, that we may need the first meeting in April to have our public hearing on our current S100 stuff. So I wouldn't, and we only have 2 in April. So if it happened to be the first May meeting, I wouldn't want that to be not in compliance with this request.
are you looking for a guarantee that we're going to come back to it?
Beg your pardon?
You're looking for a guarantee that we're going to come back to it,
Guarantee what?
that we are going to come back to this subject?
Yes,
Yeah,
but
okay.
I'll amend it. I'll amend it, not held during the month of April, but held as soon as practically possible.
Fine with me.
That's weasel words.
1 second.
I have a second.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, repeat the motion for me, please.
I move that the planning commission agenda for a planning commission meeting to be held as soon as practically possible in 2024 to include consideration of mixed use in the IO and mixed use IC districts, including workforce housing, and that staff prepare and present at that meeting draft ideas and language to allow for said uses.
Okay.
Any discussion?
Any discussion on that from staff?
No, I think that's
No.
fine.
Yeah.
I think if there was some guarantee required of having language by a certain date, that would be complicated, but we will be able to, as soon as practical, present the conceptual ideas and potential language direction by spring, summer this year.
Do you want to set
Yeah.
a not later then?
If you'd like, I will happily agree to not later than July 1st.
Can that be a friendly amendment to the motion? Instead of as soon as
I
practically
would,
possible?
if staff is okay with it, then
That's fine for the sort of raising of the initial discussion at the planning commission, absolutely.
Okay,
okay. I guess we need to vote on the motion. All in favor?
aye.
All right,
Unanimous.
you've been tasked.
You don't have enough to do.
Yeah, exactly. You can always enlist Michael's help too. Paul had mentioned in an email about other business, the Williston public hearing. Is that anything we need to?
No, it's the
No.
same as when we get these sort of FYI presentations of, Williston's doing a thing, Burlington's doing a thing. It's anytime we have a neighboring community that's updating their regulations, we get notified, and it is our obligation as staff to notify you and provide that to you.
Okay.
So it came in minutes after we gave you the packet for this meeting. So
Yeah.
Paul provided it as soon as he received it.
Just for the record and information, I was guided to some extent by a superb paper prepared by Jesse and Paul and Tom and Ilona called Planning for a Vibrant South Burlington. And in that, it says we're actively planning for the future, which included walkable mixed-use neighborhoods and workforce housing. If it's right proximate to employment, it will eliminate vehicle miles traveled and allow walking to work. So that was it. And then
And it could be a TDM. If provide workforce housing, you get so many points.
That could be very well one of those.
Be up
things
there
we
at
offer.
11 with childcare.
Yeah.
and now I have a really
Play. Yeah.
stupid question.
Yes.
Does anybody know why Green Mountain GMT uses these huge buses with 5 people in them?
Because nobody rides the bus.
Beg your pardon?
Nobody rides the bus. They drive their cars.
No, there's tons of cities that I've visited in the world that use buses that have about 26 seats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're basically stretched minivans. And these buses must be horrendously expensive to maintain
And
and
they're
run.
empty.
I don't know, but I do know I have been on these GMT buses when they have been close to full. And I
Yeah.
think it may be financially difficult for them to run different buses at different times of day, like instead of just buying one kind of bus. That would be my only guess, is that it's easier for them to have 5 of the same kind of bus than a whole variety of buses. Because there are sort of peak hour trips that end up being fairly full.
And I've never heard
seen a
anybody-
bus with 26 people in it, a GMT bus.
I have personally been on a bus with more than
Well,
26 people.
Guys,
Maybe going to Montpelier.
I'm going to say that this isn't really on the agenda, so we're going to be adjourned and then we can continue this conversation if we want to. We are adjourned.
Thank you.